Hello, everyone. Happy International Women's Day on the 111th International Women's Day. It was an International Women's Day celebration in St. Petersburg that provided the spark, or shall we say the iskra, for the Russian Revolution, underlining how workers' movements, for all their limitations on this front, have been historically the strongest and most consistent supporters of the cause of women and feminism. International Women's Day was a public holiday in the Soviet Union and remains so today in Russia and Ukraine. Finally, women and feminists have been and remain in the vanguard for movements of peace. The 23rd February 1917 March of International Women's Day in St. Petersburg was critically a protest against war. Let's keep all this in mind as we begin the latest and I think one of the most critically important webinars that the International Manifesto Group has produced. It's entitled Fog of War over Ukraine. I'm Radhika Desai. I'm the convener of the International Manifesto Group. I speak to you today from Winnipeg, which stands on the stolen lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. It's worth recalling this given that questions of sovereignty are at the core of what we will discuss today. And there are few more serious and long-lasting violations of sovereignty in the world than that of indigenous peoples in the territories that are today called Canada and the United States. We are holding this event at a time, moreover, when standards of reporting could not sink lower. Entire Western media apparatuses have become propaganda machines peddling slimy, emotionally highly strung discourses of human suffering, which, while entirely valid, seem to completely evade the realities of the actual realities of conflict, the casualties, the hits, the actual troop movements, military gains and losses. We have to wade through a whole lot of emotional verbiage before we get well-placed lies. Let me just give you an example. Today, the Canadian public broadcaster, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation reported, and I say verbatim reported, that WHO has declared that Russia is attacking hospitals. When I looked for, written on the web for the story, the original stories, I found that the WHO had explicitly avoided mentioning the perpetrator. It did not say Russia was the perpetrator of these attacks. It merely reported that hospitals had been targeted, and that is, of course, a terrible thing. Of course, we hear nothing as well about the arming of civilians, including members of neo-Nazi and far-right organizations. There is about this only silence. Today, we want to discuss many questions that are essential to understanding how and why the conflict over Ukraine is likely to mark a turning point in our already rapidly changing world order. And we have with us to do this the experts from Russia, Ukraine, Britain, and the United States. Among the questions we want to help sort out are whether this is a war between Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and NATO, between the US and Russia, or is this a phase of the long-running war that the US has been fighting to stall its decline, a phase in which Ukraine has become a pawn for the United States? Did this war begin on the 24th of February last week, or last fall, or in 2014, when the West organized the Maidan counter-revolution in Ukraine, in 2008, when the West offered Ukraine and Georgia membership of NATO, in 2004 or 1999, when NATO engaged in 2 lots of expansion, or even going back to the way in which the West intervened to ensure the worst possible outcome of the end of communism, including the disastrous shock therapy. What are the United States' goals here? Is the US merely seeking opportunities for its 4 rentier sectors, its military industrial complex, its mining complex in a white settler society, its fire insurance and real estate industries, and its other industries such as information and communication technologies, and a big pharma that critically rely on intellectual property rights and their forcible enforcement? Is it trying to set back rivals such as China and Russia? Is it merely trying to rein in allies and solidify NATO? Will the strategy of sanctions succeed? What has really prompted Russia's actions? Putin's domestic difficulties, which are not few, or the rubbishing of Minsk by the United States and Ukraine when they signed on November 10, 2021, the Charter on Strategic Partnership that the anti-communist historian Robert Service called the key historic blunder by Washington that has led to this war. Why does NATO even exist when we have the United Nations and when the Warsaw Pact long ago ceased to exist? What are Russia's aims? Is it to demilitarize, denazify without occupation? Does it have some other aims? How will these aims be achieved? What are the roots and extent of neo-Nazis in Ukraine? A final couple of points. In this conflict that the US has ensnared Ukraine in, with the willing and even eager compliance of its president Zelensky, what can Ukrainians expect? The racism of reporters and opinion makers and even many ordinary citizens of Western countries favoring refugees from Ukraine, and the racism of some Ukrainians who keep underlining how European they are, how European their country is and their cities are. These things have recently made the headlines. Bad as they are, however, that is not the end of the story of racism in this conflict. Those rightly decrying the aforementioned racism do not appear to begin to suspect its ultimate reality, which is that racism is a consolation prize that poor whites receive from white elites, the prize that permits them to consolidate support among the former, whose economic subordination continues and may even get worse. What Ukrainians can hope to have from the embrace of the West, if they ever get there, from the conflict into which the West has landed them, will be an even lesser versions of the fortunes enjoyed, or should we say suffered, by other countries of the former East and post-Soviet space. In return for permitting the West the privilege of gutting their manufacturing to eliminate competition for Western corporations, of taking over the most lucrative parts of the economy, of exploiting their natural resources and cheap labor in situ, bereft of properly functioning economies, the people of these countries are offered the dubious privilege of traveling throughout the European continent so that ex situ they can earn low wages as farm workers and service sector workers, and yes, consider themselves white and European. And finally, how are we to understand the pattern of international support for various sides in this conflict? And in particular, what role is China playing and can China play at this dangerous conjuncture?
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.